What is the worst thing you've ever seen happen at a wedding? Story 1. At a cousin's wedding, my uncle was smashed and thought he'd had a stroke in the bathroom as he couldn't straighten himself. Turned out he'd buttoned his waistcoat to his trousers and couldn't stand up. Story 2. I was an event manager at a mansion that did a lot of weddings, so I've seen my fair share of wedding shit shows. My favorite is probably the one where the entire wedding party started drinking at noon for a 6 p.m. wedding. The groom passed out around 5, and we couldn't get him up, so I made him a ham sandwich and propped him up in his bed while I hand-fed him. Managed to get him and his boys down to the courtyard, and then had to run back in and herd the women down. The bride spilled her mimosa all over her dress. 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't find their shoes, but everyone was super happy and nice. There were about 150 people at the reception, and every single one of them got absolutely hammered. The mother of the bride kept sneaking up on me, hugging me, and the groom made me pose for some photos with them. They also gave me all the leftover wedding cake and a few bottles of wine. I miss them. Edit. So I read the question and started thinking of a good one and remembered this one and forgot the question. I don't know why I'm this way. Story 3. During the best man speech, the best man proposed to the maid of honor. Totally stole the night from the bride and groom. Now the best man and maid of honor are in the process of divorcing. Edit. Holy, this exploded. Okay, so to clear up something a lot of people have been asking, the bride and groom did not know this was going to happen. No one did. Story 4. At my own wedding reception, I saw my wife's grandma, who was about 98, very slowly, and with a terrible sense of inevitability, fall sideways off her chair. She remained in a sitting position, but just slowly tilted sideways till she was on the floor, still in the exact same pose. It sounds shitty, but all I could think was, fuck's sake, don't die at our wedding, please don't die at our wedding. Luckily, she was fine, and lived for another few years to see her 100th birthday. Edit. Gee whiz, my top-rated comment ever is about that time. I thought my wife's grandma died at our wedding. THX for the karma Grandma Mary. Story 5. Was at a wedding this summer. The groom's family absolutely tore their son-brother apart during the speeches. They didn't say one loving thing, and went on to talk about all the mistakes he made during this life. The worst thing they brought up was how he was responsible for a car accident that put someone in a coma. I was cringing. Edit. Oh, and one more travesty. Dinner wasn't served until 10 p.m. Story 7. Edit. Since people keep asking, yes, it was the man of honor. Like a maid of honor, except a guy. There was also still a best man. During the man of honor speech, the guy repeatedly said the name of the bride's ex instead of her new husband, 3 times. When I first saw bride and bride's ex, I knew they were perfect for each other. Stuff like that. And he caught himself too every time. He was insanely embarrassed. But he still did it 3 times throughout the speech. It was so awkward watching it happen. Probably the biggest social train wreck I've ever seen. Story 8. One of my best friend's weddings. The groom got so drunk that he straight disappeared from the reception. Shit got real awkward when it was time for the wedding to be over. The venue was kicking us out, and the bride and groom were supposed to take off in their vintage car and drive off to their honeymoon suite. The music went off, lights went on, and it turned into the guests searching for the groom. My husband finally found him in the parking lot, basically face down on his lips. He helped him back into the wedding, which was basically the most awkward walk of shame past the bride's glaring dad and grandfather. My friend, the bride, later told me that when they got in the room, her new husband passed out cold on the bed, and she had to wander the halls in her wedding dress looking for someone to unhook her dress for her so she could get out of it. Story 9. I was an attendant in my best friend's wedding. Her father walked her down the aisle, and while he was not visibly drunk, he had a hard time walking behind her to sit in the pew. He stepped on her dress, ripping it from her back down to her. Her thong was red. They had to stop the wedding so that she could find safety pins. Story 10. For the bouquet toss, a middle-aged guy forced his middle-aged girlfriend out onto the floor, then stood by her so she couldn't leave. The bouquet was caught by an excited little girl. The guy proceeded to the bouquet out of the little girl's hands, gave it to his middle-aged girlfriend, then ran off the floor, cheering loudly to high-five one of his buddies. The little girl ran away crying. Story 11. Just as the bride started walking down the aisle, her grandmother had a sudden cardiac event. We had to stop the procession and start CPR in the aisleway. What's worse is that we were in a large park, and people calling 911 couldn't give the address. I ran to the ranger station, but it was locked. And 2. I broke a window screen and crawled through to use the landline EMS could trace and respond. She didn't make it. As an added bonus to the horrible situation, I later found out the ranger had placed a hidden camera in the women's restroom where the girls got ready dressed for the wedding. He served jail time. Story 12. I've said this before on here, but they didn't have any tables or chairs. We had nowhere to sit or to put our plates down. Everyone had to hold their food standing up and put their drinks down on the ground. Since there were no chairs to make an aisle for her to walk down, she just kind of strolled through the crowd while people were confused and talking. "Where are the chairs?" was the theme of the wedding. I was a close friend, so our group sent me to ask her why there were no tables and chairs, and she simply said, "Oh, you have to pay extra for that." Edit. This was not a casual outdoor quick wedding or anything like that. Traditional wedding, 5 hours total including ceremony, full buffet and open bar, 200 guests. She was not caught off guard in any way. This is one of my closest friends. They decided not to pay for them, that's it. And since this is blowing up, I may as well add in the tide bit that during the speech portion, people were talking and complaining so loudly. Where are the chairs? Am I supposed to sit on the ground? That the groom took the mic and screamed at the top of his lungs for everyone to, and I quote, "Shut up! I said shut up! Shut the up or leave now!" A lot of people left. OMG, I texted someone else who was at the wedding to see if they remembered, and their response is fucking amazing. Apparently, the exact same thing stands out to them as well. Story 13. The grandmother of the bride died. At the reception, she was dancing and having fun, and then just collapsed. The bride and groom did amazingly. Grandmother was quite elderly and sick. They waited with her for the ambulance and quickly told everyone she was all right and on her way to the hospital. Everyone was slightly worried and had thought the evening had just gotten to her. Nope, she had passed away right there, as I found out after the reception was over and her and I were cleaning up the hall together. Also, groom was terminal. He was given 6 months about a week before the wedding. He survived about 3 months afterwards. Happiest thing is the bride was pregnant with his child and gave birth to a lovely daughter. She has since remarried, but my goodness, a widow 3 months after the marriage with a newborn. No, she didn't get a huge life insurance policy either. That woman is strong as nails. Story 14. There was like an 8-year-old boy who had loads of confetti in his hand, so I didn't think much of it. Turns out he thought it was sugar paper and ate olive. He then proceeded to projectile vomit everywhere through the middle of the ceremony. Was one of the funniest and most disgusting moments of my life. Story 15. There was this guy outside of the hotel walking up to groups of people in the smoking area, asking how much each person weighed. He was very overweight himself, and his jeans looked to be on inside out. He was severely underdressed for the occasion, and no one seemed to know him. Anyways, he would ask a person's weight and then exclaim, "I can bench that," until one guy, I think he was a family member of the bride, got into an argument with him and started asking around if anyone knew this person, figuring that he was a wedding crasher. That's when this gentleman decided to cut a deal with everyone. "If I can pick up that bench with my bare hands, can I stay for the party?" To which everyone agrees, because the bench was clearly bolted to the ground. So he walks over, puts his hands on the bench, crouches down, and with all of his might, shits his pants in front of everyone. He stood up and waddled off through the parking lot to never be seen again. I did hear throughout the night people talking about a guy who was on shrooms outside trying to lift a bench, so I guess he was also tripping. Story 16. Ex-boyfriend of the bride got super drunk at the reception and started rambling loudly, heard by half the reception hall, about how the marriage was wrong and how she was the love of his life. He was there with his then new, presumably, imminently ex-girlfriend. Fuck knows why she invited him. Story 17. Friend's wedding. The bride's nephew, about 7 I think, was the ring bearer. Instead of sitting at the front after he made it down the aisle, he decided to do karate moves in front of, and sometimes behind, the couple during the entire ceremony. He's in almost all their photos. Edit. An alarming number of you are worried that this was you. The boy is still too young to really be on Reddit, I think, so you're probably safe from anonymous internet judgment, lol. Story 18. We were partying in Puerto Vallarta, and there was a beautiful wedding going on at the hotel next door. A friend of mine was pretty drunk, then just sprinted for the wedding. He hopped the wall, blasted through the seating arrangements, then body slammed the 6-foot-tall wedding cake. He spent the next 2 days in Mexican jail, and will forever be a fucking in my heart. Story 19. My cousin's mother-in-law told my cousin that her dress was ugly and then called the next day to ask if they had. Super awkward. My cousin is super religious and modest and was waiting for her wedding night to do anything, so it was extremely embarrassing for her. Story 20. My dad's friend's son got married when I was a teenager. He's a really cool guy, and we played Nintendo a lot whenever we visited. Anyway, the embarrassing story is about his bride. She decided that she wanted to sing to him at one point during the ceremony, so she chose the song Wind Beneath My Wings by Bette Midler. Midler is an alto. The bride was a high soprano. Unfortunately, she couldn't sing very well either. So for several minutes, she squeaks this song out while he's standing there with the most awkward look on his face. I think everyone felt embarrassed. I know I did. The good thing is that they're still happily married and have a daughter. Story 21. My friend got married around age 21. Neither he nor the bride had much money, so the wedding was modest but still very nice. They did have a lovely three-tier cake, though. The ceremony goes fine, and the bride will cut the cake music is playing. She was a dainty, tiny little thing, maybe 5, 2 inches and 100 pounds soaking wet. If she swatted a fly, it might not even notice. She approaches the cake with the knife, barely touches it, and boom! The whole thing immediately collapses. All 3 tiers somehow, all over someone's elderly grandmother who was seated right by the ill-fated cake. That old lady, who had barely moved throughout the whole affair, shot out of her chair like she was fired from a cannon, screeching murder and sending cake shrapnel all over those nearby. Another close friend and I watched the whole thing from close range and were paralyzed and purple from hysterical, breathless laughter, as were many of the other guests. I later heard the bakery refunded them for the cake due to its not-up-to-code construction. They should have charged them double for generating memories that no one there will ever forget. Story 22. After arriving 45 minutes after the ceremony was to begin, during the ring exchange, the groom gets this blank look and says he didn't know he was supposed to buy her another ring. SEL slipped off her wedding band and handed it off to the preacher. Story 23. My husband's brother having a seaside wedding. Our almost 2-year-old was the ring bearer. He passed off the rings to the best man, Dad, then toddled away, off the cliff. It was proba 60, 80, a drop to the beach below, but he luckily got caught up in the bushes, and a husband snatched him up. He was buckled into his stroller after that kamikaze kid. Story 24. I worked at a wedding venue for 4 years. Having to stop a bride's stepdad from hitting her over the head with a chair was a highlight. The whole room were just fighting with each other. The best man kicked the mother-in-law. Different wedding, some dickhead bit the DJ because he refused to play a certain song. For me, the absolute worst one was when the newlyweds were arguing at the end of the night in front of their young son. She admitted to cheating on him. It all came out there and then in front of his family, and he was devastated. Story 25. My cousin's wedding. She's second of 3 sisters. The eldest sister is a bit of an attention and drama queen. The wedding is beautiful, just absolutely amazing. The bride cousin is the first to be married, and this is clearly bothering the older cousin. The older cousin was also known to be very sexually active with random mates. So, the day before the wedding, the older cousin, who's then single and unattached, comes up to me and says, "Don't tell anyone, but I'm pregnant." So I naturally tell my brother-in-law and sister immediately, and they tell me she already told them. We validated this with multiple other attendees. She'd gone around and told what seemed like everyone. Fast forward to the day of the wedding, the bride cousin is pissed because she's now caught wind of the fact that the older sister is going around telling people she's pregnant. It finally came to a head after the ceremony. The older sister, who was a known drinker, gave a toast and started it with, "I wish I could be having a proper drink right now." Oops! Well, yeah, I'm pregnant, ha 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 ha. The bride cousin just sat there wide-eyed while everyone half-heartedly clapped for the pregnant cousin. TOAL'd daughter. Older cousin is jealous of younger cousin getting married, intentionally gets pregnant for attention, and announces it at her sister's wedding. Story 26. Brother and sister-in-law thought it would be fun to have their dogs walked down the aisle after their flower girl spread the flower petals. The dogs thought midway down the aisle was the perfect place for a shitting photo op on the white runner. Story 27. Bride never showed up. My cousin was the groom and had about 500 people in attendance. He got on the mic and said there's no bride, so we had the party anyway. He married someone else 2 years later. Story 28. This will get buried, but I have the winner. My mother, at my eldest brother's wedding, decided that since she wasn't paying for the alcohol, was going to get her money's worth. She downed about 6 generous glasses of wine at the wedding supper and hit up the open bar shortly afterwards. She then decided she was going to dance with the, still happily married, father of the bride, and started groping him and trying to grind on him to sexy songs like Kodachrome by Simon and Garfunkel and Dancing Queen, as well as other ABBA classics. After things got really uncomfortable, I stepped in for a dance with her and told her under no circumstances is she to go near that man again as she is making a fool of herself. She leaves the dance floor much to everyone's relief. I find her an hour later having a tequila shooting contest with a man at the open bar. She tells me she only had 9 shots, but I don't know if she was telling me the truth. From that point on, she went around slurrily insulting people. She asked me if I was embarrassed by her seconds before looking at my dad. They've been divorced for over 25 years at this point, and saying, "Hey Richard, wanna?" He slowly slinked away from the table without saying a word. It culminated with her going around the reception, saying the father of the bride had sexual assaulted her on the dance floor, and she was going to get him for what he did. This is shortly before her going to the bathroom, pulling down her panties and sitting on the toilet, puking down the front of her dress and passing out on the bathroom stall floor with her underpants around her ankles covered in vomit. We had to cut a hole out of a garbage bag to put her head through and make it like a dress so we could get her in a car and not ruin the seats with vomit. To this day, despite the other 100 people or more who were there seeing the opposite, she still insists that the father of the bride had sexual assaulted her, and she sends him nasty messages on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, my mother. Story 29, the bride fainted and hit her head hard enough to go to the hospital in an ambulance. No refunds, so they amazingly still had the reception. Pretty subdued. We had a few drinks and just left. Story 30. I went to a wedding in a huge manor house on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The house was lit up by big floodlights in the floor, pointing up at the house. When it got dark, some guests ran inside to the bar dance floor and shouted at people to come outside and look. A man and a woman who met for the first time at the wedding were having below one of the floodlights, but didn't realize that their gyrations were being projected 50 feet high onto the side of the house. A perfect shadow of two shaggers. They were very embarrassed when they found out. Story 31. Not a bad thing that happened for me, just really awkward. Went to wedding of someone from my church a few years back. When it came time to say the vows, he pulls out a sheet of paper and reads on for like 5 minutes, getting really intimate and pouring his heart out to her. It was kind of awkward, TBH, but the icing on the cake was her response. When he was done, she just giggled loudly and awkwardly and got out ditto. That's it. That was her wedding vow. So freaking awkward. Story 32. I was friends with a couple that had split right before my wedding. I knew I couldn't invite both of them, and I was closer friends with Guy, but he decided to move out of state after the breakup, so I invited the girl. Let's call her Kelly. Kelly shows up with a new, younger knockoff version of her recent ex. Cool, whatever. Kelly is about 5'11", 120 pounds maybe. Good-looking girl, long legs. She decided to wear a mini pleather skirt, which wouldn't have been too bad, only there was also a 2-inch slit up the back. A little much for a wedding, but whatever. The whole wedding family members, friends, and coworkers kept asking me who Kelly was, and if I knew she was basically flashing all her goodies to the whole guest list all night, including the children. See, I was too distracted by my wedding to notice that Kelly also decided to not wear underwear. So every time she sat down during the ceremony and reception, her chaunch and would be visible for all behind her to see. Thanks, Kelly. Now my 90-year-old great-grandma knows all too well what your vagina looks like. Story 33. I ruined my cousin's wedding videos, and I'll never live it down. When I was 13, my cousin got married, and my brother was in charge of photography and video for the day. At some point in the day, my brother gave me the camcorder and told me to shoot and take video. Longer story shorter, I was unknowingly recording when myself and another cousin were talking about girls at the wedding. And as one girl walked by, I said, "I would that girl in the fucking," 1 week later. The whole entire family decided to watch the video of the wedding, and I have never felt so fucking embarrassed in my life. Edit. No, I never actually fucked that girl in the fucking. But my family occasionally likes to ask, "Hey, you gonna that girl in the fucking?" whenever I bring a new girl around, usually while she's standing right next to me. I'm 25 now, and it's been a funny 12 years at my expense. Fuckers. Story 34. My uncle's wedding. The bride's father and brothers got drunk and racist. They openly expressed they didn't like her marrying a wetback, and my family and hers got into a brawl. I seen my dad's pants fall down while he was swinging at a guy lol. Story 35. My fiancé and I recently went to the trashiest wedding in existence. 1. When the groom went for the garter belt, the bride smashed his face into her crotch and grinded against it, saying, "Yeah, baby." A detail that I forgot about was that the bride had informed everybody earlier that she was not wearing any underwear, and it was also an outdoor wedding that had a temperature comparable to the pits of 2. There were 4 separate fistfights, with the bride being involved in 2 of them. She threw the first punch in the second fight. 3. After the bride and groom were pronounced husband and wife, all the bridesmaids proceeded to strip down to tank tops and booty shorts because they were too hot in their bridesmaids' dresses. They did this in front of everyone and also redressed in front of everyone after everybody came back and after cocktail hour. 4. After dinner was completed, one of the bridesmaids and another guy who was there loudly proclaimed that they were going in the field to go, and they would be back in 15 minutes. One of the small children, no older than 8, at the reception turned to their mother and said, "Ew, Mom, they're going to go!" The mom just laughed it off, which just made us sad. Hillbilly Canadian weddings are a treat. Edit. I don't do words good, eh? Noyings. Story 36. Friend's wedding a few years ago. The DJ had screens up for slideshows of the bride and groom that were played during some of the songs. Fine. DJ's screensaver was Girls Gone Wild style videos. We saw lots of on those screens. Story 37. My friend proposed to what I really suspect was a meth addict at my other friend wedding. They knew each other for 2 fucking weeks. She was his first. Story 38. One of my wife's coworkers got married this past summer. Her father passed away from a fatal heart attack the morning of the wedding, but her family insisted and convinced her to go in with it, so she did. It was awkward and nobody in the building made it through without crying. Even the minister. Story 39. Having to watch a very close friend get married to a guy who I knew had hit her on a number of occasions. It was gut-wrenching to know that there wasn't really anything I could do about it except be there to support her. Thankfully, they got divorced 6 months later and she's now in a much better place with a much nicer man. Story 40. Seen a guy propose to his GF at another person's wedding. This isn't terrible, like having people get into a fight, but generally looked down upon. The guy who proposed didn't ask the bride and groom if it would be okay, so he sort of stole their thunder. It was pretty awkward after the proposal, and there was lots of judgmental hushed whispering. Story 41. I worked weddings for a living and once saw the best man get loaded, give a speech, and profess his love of the bride and how they had slept together 2 nights before. Open bar. 1. Best man. 0. Story 42. My estranged aunt showed up to my sister's wedding, already high on what we assume was coke, downed 2 glasses of wine, blamed my mother, her sister, for making her the way she was, and then stormed out saying, "I've gotta go get high drunk." This happened within 10 minutes before the ceremony started. This was April 2016. She's cleaned her life up now. She's 55-ish. Edit. She said either high or drunk. She did not say the slash. Story 43. My cousin got married a couple years back and I hadn't met some of her family. After the actual ceremony, we started to socialize a bit with people, and my stepdad was clearly upset over something going on at another table. He walked off and the bride and groom came over to say hello. My cousin comes over and just sighs, then points over to a table across the room. You see them over there? That's my mom's cousin. That's her husband, their kids, and their girlfriend. What? It wasn't until I looked over that I realized most people were avoiding their table because they were both all over this third party with their children in front of them, visibly uncomfortable. Now, normally I don't give a, but my cousin had made it pretty clear she didn't want the GF attending her wedding since 1. She didn't know her, and 2. It was wildly inappropriate how they acted. To top it all off and make matters worse, I later learned they had recently lost their youngest child to SIDS and their other 2 children discovered her dead because both parents were hopped up on drugs. Somewhere in their fucked up logic, they decided to essentially bring a girlfriend into the mix to cope with the loss of their child rather than being there for the other 2. You could just tell it was 50 shades of fucked up going on in that household, and I couldn't help but feel bad for the kids. Story 44 caterer here. Once during cocktail hour before the reception dinner, this one couple at a table kept taking 2 champagnes every time I came around to them. Probably shouldn't have, but hey, I understand needing to be shit-faced at a wedding myself to tolerate it. Later on, around time of dinner start, the wedding coordinator finds me, grabs me by the arm and says it's an emergency. 2 Flute Lady was sitting in a stupor against a wall outside the dining room, crying about how she slept with the groom once. Now he paid no attention to her and was throwing glasses. Story 45. My immediate ex after. So was drunk and sad mad that I was talking to other people, aka our friends the bride and groom. So he grabbed me first, and when I pulled away, he came at me and shoved me flat on the dance floor in front of everyone. He was escorted out and I ended it right then and there. Now I am getting married in 3 weeks to the greatest man I know, and edit. I am stalking this thread. Story 46. Divorced father of the groom started up about how much better his new wife was compared to his old wife during his speech. On, and the qualities of Asian women versus white women. I've never looked at my shoes so hard in my life. Story 47 at my wedding. I'm Australian. We were getting to the speeches part of the night, but were waiting for me to come back from the toilets. The meal had not quite agreed with me, and I was dealing with the consequences. My buddy who was being MC was currently stalling the 110-ish people and decided it'd be funny to come find me, wandering mic in hand. He enters the toilets and asks how much longer I'll be. I didn't know he had a mic and that everyone was waiting for me, so replied quickly back with an angry, "Fuck off, cunt! I'm doing a shit! I'll be done when I'm fucking done," much to the horror of the people in the next room. Story 48. Went to my cousin's wedding, and the groom and men wore tuxedo shirts, and when they got to the "I do's," he said, "Oh, I guess." Shortly after eating, they proceeded to light the trash on fire and shoot clay pigeons behind the house after heavy drinking. Good times. Story 49. Mother of the groom showed up in white. Bride took her shopping weeks before and thought they had found a blue dress that made emoji look beautiful. I wish to this day I had thought to spill my wine on her and force her to change. Story 50. Oh, and one more. Grandmother broke her ankle dancing, didn't want to bother anyone, so sat down for the rest of the night. A&E at 11 p.m. 3 hours later. Welsh grannies are hard. Story 51. When my brother and new wife got to the hotel apologized for the rowdy lot in the bar. My brother said it's fine as they were our family. Story 52. The sister of the bride who wasn't invited showed up drunk and got in a fight with the bride until the father of the bride broke it up by putting the sister in a chokehold and dragging her out of the venue. The bride was surprisingly fine afterwards. Source. I'm a wedding caterer. Story 53. My mother-in-law handed out an EP of my now sister-in-law to as many guests as she could and threw a fit in the middle of the dance floor later that night because I didn't let her daughter sing with the band or karaoke. Her exact words were, "How dare you make today all about you?" It was my wedding day. Story 54. Cousin decided to save her first kiss ever for the ceremony. Celibacy taken to the next level. The bride and groom were visibly giddy from nerves throughout the 1-hour prayer-rich ceremony, and the kiss was the most awkward thing to watch. Sigh much unnecessary jaw movement. They both turned beet red and hugged. Too awkward for everyone involved to be cute. Story 55. I once worked a wedding where one of the guests thought it would be perfectly reasonable to change her baby's shitty diaper on a table where other guests were eating. I offered to show her the restroom where we had a baby changing station, or even an empty banquet room, but the disgusting said she was finished and had the audacity to shove the dirty diaper at me and tell me to throw it away for her. The other guests looked both disgusted and mortified. Story 56. Just prior to my sister's wedding ceremony beginning, as everyone was getting in place and last-minute things were being done in this big old Catholic church, my father noticed a woman with a confused look at the back of the church and approached her, asking if she needed anything. She informed him she was the bride, then opened a beat-up suitcase she had which contained something resembling a wedding-type dress. My father, suspecting she had some mental health issues, played along, suggesting that she may be in the wrong church. When that didn't work, he slipped off and called the police. In the meantime, the lady walked up to my soon-to-be brother-in-law and said, "You aren't going to leave me this time." When the police pulled up to the church, the lady spotted them and made a quick exit. Turns out she had a habit of pulling the stunt. My brother-in-law still occasionally reminds my sister that he had a choice on their wedding day, but still chose her. Story 57. Groom's immediate family walked out during the bride and groom's first dance and went home. He came from a very Christian family, and this was their way of protesting the marriage since it was done outside of the church. It was pretty bad since this included his parents, grandparents, and siblings who members of the wedding party, including his best man, gutted him, and they never let on to anyone they were going to do this. It was pretty big buzzkill, and some more of his extended family left, and their friends, but we stayed and drank the night away. It's been 2 years now and they still refuse to speak to him. Story 58. Ex-husband found out about the ceremony and showed up uninvited and drunk, making a big stink. Luckily, it was before the actual ceremony, so we just had to kind of strong-arm him out of the building and remind him he wasn't welcome. Story 59. I went to a wedding recently and the groom is from Mexico. His entire family was absent from the wedding because half of them suffered from the earthquake, and the other half is nervous about traveling to America in general. Halfway through the reception, the DJ turns on the Rocky theme song, gets on the mic and says something along the lines of, "We wanted to do something special for the happy couple because they are so special, so here you go." Simultaneously, a foldable wall was being lifted slowly into the air to reveal something. The groom began weeping and people were clapping, all assuming it would be his family behind the divider to surprise him. It ended up being the desert table. That they paid for. That was planned anyway. It was pretty heartbreaking to watch. Story 60. In lieu of the garter toss, my cousin's new husband washed her feet for an entire song at the reception. It was so weird and awkward and weird. Asterisk, asterisk, edit. This is now my highest rated comment. Weird. Asterisk, asterisk. Story 61. Bride got so drunk she fell over and her popped out of her dress. Her mother tried to help her get her together, so she punched her mom in face while shouting at her for ruining her wedding. It was glorious and tragic all at once. We were married for about 2 years. Story 62. I was just at a wedding where the father of the groom gave a 10-minute speech about socialism and how we were all here because of the community, complete with a 5-minute story about Steve the hobo, the local homeless man that pretended to be a pirate and played with their kids. To top it all off, the mother of the groom grabbed the mic when he was done and did an impression of Steve the hobo congratulating the bride and groom for the wedding. It was Fun. Story 63. Used to do catering for weddings. Usually, the younger crowds tend to get rowdy towards the end of the night. During last call, the best man's best friend pushed a guy waiting for his drink and spilled a glass of alcohol all over him. He then tried to start a fight with one of the groomsmen, so the best man went and threw him to the ground and started punching him. Everyone was drunk at this point. Eventually, the drunk guy got up and left to go sit in the car and cool down. We made sure he wasn't driving. And the guy who was pushed at the bar and had the drink spilled on him wanted to press charges. Also, one of the bridesmaids was proposed to at this wedding, which is a stupid thing to do.